Hi, yes, I'm Rachel Tumminello, and I'm just appearing as a born and bred Darwinite.
Thank you very much. When you're ready.
Thank you. I'll be short. I don't have a lot. I've just got a couple of comments on that very large, extensive document. Thank you for all your work. I have been unable to read all of it. There's a lot of it. But just firstly, just before I get to that, just quickly, just to note in terms of public trust in the government to be able to actually, take on board any kind of regulatory processes or monitoring and assessments. Just in December, the ABC News reported an issue with the MacArthur River mine where they dumped a whole load of rocks in the wrong place, causing all these chemical reactions and plumes of sulphuric whatever in the air, not good stuff. And the concern with this, I think, is that this was dealt with verbally. It says in the report, it was dealt in the news article. There's no written report of that. And when I read that, I was like, wow, my childcare centre has stricter regulations than that. My child falls over. When I arrive there, I am given a verbal report. I'm given it's a written report in their folder, and they go through and advise me of any policies and procedures of what they dealt with and what they're going to do with in the future. So it concerns me that we don't even do that on this much larger scale of potential toxic emissions into the environment. And I think it indicates too that in terms of any kind of increasing our processes to have better transparency and accountability of being able to track actually what happens in these mine sites so that people can actually, review how well everything's going. If things aren't even written down, how can we ever do that? How do we ever have access to a trail to be able to, monitor that and improve it? And what it also says to me is that recommendations on implementing new procedures is not enough, that this requires cultural change within the government and within the mining industry. And when we talk about a lack of trust from the public to this industry and the overwhelming opposition to this industry going ahead, and as you have heard throughout a lot of your submissions and the public open hearings that you have had, is the legacy of mining in the NT, and that locals, particularly your long-term locals and the intergenerational locals, they're really, really quite aware of this and they have no trust in this. And then you have something like this just in December and it says it questions the capability of this even being able to happen, this kind of cultural change being able to occur between how governments and mining companies and communities work together. So just onto the points, just a couple of minor points, well, as in not big extensive ones like Naomi's submission covered. But just, I found it a little bit difficult to assess the balance in how you use some of the literature. I'm directly referring to the chapter on social impacts.
Thank you.
Yeah, probably needed that up front. I'll put my glasses on. So on page 74, there was a little bit of an emphasis on the potential benefits to come.
Sorry, which page was that?
Page 274.
274, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
Yep, there's an emphasis, or I read it, the way it comes across to me in terms of the balance of how you talk about how things are talked about, how many sentences, how many emphases, how many arguments are made. That I read this as there's an emphasis on the potential benefits to come of local children being able to return home with uni degrees to find work in their local areas. That's a reference that comes from a reference that is used. I looked up that reference and I was disturbed to read that it's actually a statement made by a Queensland Member of Parliament in the House of Representatives. I don't know what the stats were to support his statement. And I find that the heavy emphasis on that potentiality is unwarranted without any kind of statistical support for that.
Which footnote are you referring to?
Sorry?
Sorry, again, just so I can track this down later, which footnote are you referring to?
Oh, yes, sorry, I have written that down. I think it's 32.
Thank you, great.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
So it comes from the Queensland Gasfields Commission 2017, which when I finally got that down, because I had to look around for the references, when I looked at that report, it's actually just a what do you call them? It's like a statement made by the minister. Doesn't refer to any actual kind of data.
No, thank you. We'll chase that down.
And then on page 278, there's the use of Norman, reference Norman 2016. It's near the top of the page. I didn't write the number of that one down, but it's up in the very top of the page. Which suggests, so you use this paper to suggest that this industry can provide unique opportunities for younger generation and remote communities. So I looked at that reference, and in actual fact that paper highlights that there is a disconnect between what mining companies say they're going to do in employing local people and the stats of what they actually do. And also too that this reference is very specific to Indigenous populations. So I'm a bit concerned that there is this implication that it can be used more broadly to say younger generations. I think it's a little bit disingenuous. And the reason I pull out these things is because when you return to the earlier chapter, sorry, it's very difficult when you're trying to look at social impact stuff because they interconnect across everything, and it's hard to track everything across the, you know, you have to organise it somehow. It just means that it's not always in ways that you can follow. So this is the chapter on health impacts, I think it is.
Chapter 10, yes?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I can't find the page. And so on page 240, when we talk about the impact on social cohesiveness, mental health and well-being. And so what it says here is that there's been unable to find any cogent evidence that supports an evaluation of the magnitude of this risk. I'm not quite sure what that means because, sure, there's actually very little research on it, and I think that that's actually a major issue. So I'm not quite sure what the implication of that is in just saying, well, we can't really find it. And also too that the panel further notes that some of the submissions from industry suggest more positive effects on wellbeing associated with improved employment opportunities, improved social benefits and facilities, etc. And so then when you come back to the social impact assessment, you can see that that final sentence has been picked up and there's this attempt to make an argument for improved local employment. I think it's rather tenuous. I think it's kind of quite optimistic and not really grounded in a lot of major data. And I find that the lack of dealing with the fact that there is already, fracking industry has already started, it doesn't start when the wells go in, we're already in it now, yes, that there is a particular social, psychological impact, and I think that that's really critical. You know, I know a lot of the submissions because I actually read a lot of them because they're really interesting.
Good.
Yeah, but, that, you know, the connection to land and identity is really, really critical. I mean, that kind of underscores who we are as people. And I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know the background of all of you. I don't know who of you are, you know, Territorians or not, or where you come
from. All that information's on the website. There's CVs for all of the panel.
Yes, yes. Unfortunately, I read that last year and I don't remember it.
Fair enough.
But, you know, a lot of Territorians, whatever their cultural backgrounds, but long-term Territorians were quite a breed, as I'm sure many people are in many places, and identity is what underscores, you know, human being and social cohesiveness and how we do things. And when people are saying that we're concerned about what this is going to look like, just without even talking about the risks of the water contamination, of what this is going to look like across the NT, and not even what it's going to look like, but what we might know, even if we can't see it because we might not live in that particular area. You know, that is a real erosion of who we are as Territorians. And it's a real erosion of who the Territory is in relationship to Australia. And I realise that this is really difficult to explain, and it's difficult for you to even, you know, incorporate, given the, you know, the focus in terms of regulatory and risk mitigation and things like that. But we're talking about really fundamental issues here of who we are as people, and I just can't emphasise enough that I think that that underscores everything, and it's really important. And you have mentioned that, you know, it does threaten, or it raises issues for identity and things like this. But, you know, I'm into social science, that's my background, and for me, the social comes before the technological. So it's about my priorities, obviously, are potentially different. And I realise that some people will say that, well, we can't have social if we don't have economic and if we don't have jobs and money and things like that. But what is not being addressed, because it's not your remit and that's perfectly fine, is that there are many other opportunities for creating economic boom in the NT, and we could be looking forward into different industries than what we currently have, than this option, and that this option is particularly damaging to other industries. And I know that you've seen a lot of reports on that, the potential damage this industry is going to cause to pastoralists, to tourism, which is also underreported, and I realise you also note because there isn't actually a lot of research on that. But tourism operators are really concerned about this. If you go down this, you know, Mitchell Street Backpackers and you talk to all of these people, you know, the NT has an incredible reputation and is revered in so many countries. People flock here from all over the place, especially Europe, that has lost so much of their natural environment. They come here for the wildness. They come here for this idea of who we are. And broad-scale fracking is going, or hydraulic fracturing, is going to destroy that. So we're thinking long-term. We're not thinking what's our income for the next 20 years. We're thinking who are we going into the future. And when people are concerned about climate change, we're talking 80 years, we're talking 100 years, we're talking 250 years. And the people who are really concerned are thinking big. And that's what we need to do. And I'm sorry that it's not in your terms of reference, but I have to express that because it's how we're going to survive into the future and who are we going to be. And we want to be healthy and whole in a beautiful environment, engaged in industries that are supportive and forward-thinking and that build communities, that build cohesion. I didn't actually plan that round, sorry.
That was very insightful, thank you.
No worries. One last point. Sorry, I hope I haven't gone over time because that was not timed. Page 280, so back in the social impact section, there again, it's about this balance in here, and I understand your role is to look for a balance and objective viewpoint, and that's great. But I did find that there was an emphasis on the people who felt, there was a discussion on that page about people's reactions to this process and how people were feeling, you know, disempowered and threatened because either they were for fracking and felt like those people against them were discriminating against, whatever, but either direction. Do you get what I mean, or shall I look it up? And there is a phrase here that I found interesting called these anti-fracking activists. I'm not entirely sure what that means, given that I'm just a member of the community, and most people I know who are quite anti-fracking aren't activists. We're actually just people in the community and who are, you know, highly disturbed by this, you know, and we don't always know what to make of it. It doesn't matter if you have wonderful regulation. If one well breaks out of 10,000 and that well is over an important aquifer, what does that mean? There's a cumulative impacts of toxins. So I'm not saying I know that, I'm just saying. And also that your own stats on the submissions that you provide at the beginning of that section clearly state the significant majority of submissions were highly concerned and probably, you know, phrased as not really supportive of fracking. And yet you emphasise in those discussions how the people against fracking are really kind of like causing problems. Now, I know you don't state that, but yes, I understand, Dr. Pepper, but it's about, Justice Pepper, sorry. It's about how you read it. It's about the perception and implication of the people reading it. And when I read this, I felt the impression is that people who were concerned about fracking were actually causing the problems, because a lot of the recommendations about increasing the, you know, the social licence and that is all about, you know, getting us on board, as opposed to how we can co-govern this kind of issue. It also fails to acknowledge, and maybe it's because it wasn't in the submissions and therefore completely fair enough, but it does fail to address the fact that the mining companies offer an extreme amount of disinformation to the public. This has been reported in the community forums. I myself have seen their banners and signs up at the shows, you know, the royal shows, where they have banners saying, oh, we've been doing mining for years and it's all great. And really kind of quite disingenuous information. So, but I'm not here to attack mining companies. I'm here to say that I feel like there needs to be an equal balance in how we talk about these things. I feel like I'm in a debate on 5 minutes. And just the last thing, and I think it's not really, you know, probably possible, and I kind of realised when I was reviewing their report, is that there are things that are really interconnected across chapters, and that does make it very difficult to follow, and I really appreciate the effort you have put into doing that. My only concern is there a remit within your terms of reference, because the way I read and interpret them there is, but maybe there isn't and you've got enough other stuff to do. Is the cross-linkages between the risks and impacts between the environmental and social factors. So when you have, you talk about risks to, you know, water contamination and things like that, but what is the risks of those in terms of its flow-on impacts into the social areas, like the Catherine example of the PFAS contamination where, you know, they can't drink their local water. So if you have small communities in remote areas, you know, what are the flow-on impacts of that risk, of the potentiality of these social impacts of people being dispossessed from their land? So I know that you're not unaware of that, but it's just difficult sometimes when you're reading those other heavy sections on the water and the land and the wells and the things like that, that it feels very removed from the actual reality of what those risks are for people living in those places. Thank you very much for your time. And
No, thank you. I must say we don't often get people who come and talk to us specifically about social impact, so we're always grateful when someone such as yourself does, and I will certainly reread what we've said in Chapter 12 in light of some of the constructive comments and criticisms you've made. Absolutely.
Great, thank you. I realise that you've said that there isn't enough research, and I'm going to go and read the 2 references you've got there. But I was really disturbed when I read one of the papers that was a very thorough social assessment of the, I have no idea how to say it, the Marcellus shale?
Marcellus, yeah.
Yeah, so, because that one obviously has had the most research on it in any kind of fracking stuff. But, you know, I found a very disturbing paper that did a lot of review with the people, and they said it was akin to an extreme trauma, what those communities went through. Now, trauma is a severe word. We don't use that lightly. Psychologists do not use that word lightly. Trauma is child abuse. Trauma is being raped. Trauma is coming home from war. You know, this is not light stuff. So I realise that there's maybe not a dearth of evidence, or, you know, the opposite of dearth, you know, the large amount of evidence. But I think that we need to acknowledge that the preliminary evidence is concerning.
Well, certainly if you come across, in light of your expertise, any additional information, articles, whatever, please do send them to us as soon as possible. We'd very gratefully receive them.
Great, thank you.
Without a doubt. Thank you. Any questions? All right, again, thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you very much.